Gil paced the emergency department waiting room. How long did it take to set fingers and patch up burns? Ivy needed to rest. She was probably starving. Her dinner had been on the counter, cold, uneaten. She didn't need to be facing this alone. She might not be alone. Gil studied the people in the waiting area. Could any of them be here for Ivy? She'd lived in Raleigh for several years. She had to have friends. Her ring finger was blissfully free of adornment, so he was fairly certain there was no fiancé, no husband, but that didn't mean she didn't have a boyfriend. He'd kept up with her career, and he knew the outline of what her life had looked like during the 15 years they'd spent apart. But he had no clue what had colored in the spaces between her education and work. There was so much he didn't know about her, but in the few minutes he'd been with her, he'd been able to confirm 3 things. 1, she was in big trouble. Those guys weren't there to play, but based on her responses, she didn't know why they were there or what they wanted. 2, she'd known he was in Raleigh, and she was happy to see him. Although he probably shouldn't read too much into that. Anyone would be happy to see any federal agent walk in while they were being tortured. But he'd expected her to be more surprised than she'd been. If he was right, then he wasn't the only one who'd been keeping tabs. 3rd, she was still his Ivy. She'd grown up, but the Ivy he'd known was still there. Blonde hair only a few shades darker than when they were kids now fell in loose waves to her shoulders. The same blue eyes he'd looked into thousands of times, the same tiny birthmark at her temple. She was taller than Emily by several inches, probably 5'7" without shoes. Her skin was still fair, and she still fit perfectly in his arms.